Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to crack the code on an absolutely fundamental real estate concept. If you're gearing up for your real estate licensing exam, you're going to run into a ton of terminology that sounds, frankly, incredibly similar. It can be super overwhelming. But don't worry, we're going to cut through all that noise right now and break down one of the most important distinctions you absolutely need to know: freehold versus leasehold estates. By the end of this, you'll be able to tell the difference between these two without even a second thought, which is going to save you precious time and points on test day. Okay, let's dive into this. I want to start us off with a really foundational question. Do you know the exact legal difference between owning a property and merely possessing it? In our everyday lives, we kind of blur those two together, right? Like if you have the keys to a house in your pocket, well, it feels like it's yours. But in the real estate world, ownership and possession, those are two completely different legal realities. Understanding that exact difference is literally the key to mastering freehold and leasehold estates. It's the dividing line for every single piece of real estate out there. Real quick, before we map out those boundaries, I do need to give a brief professional reminder. This explainer is strictly for educational exam prep support. We can't guarantee specific exam questions, passing results, or licensing outcomes. And please remember that licensing rules, specific terms, and what the exam emphasizes can absolutely vary by state. So definitely check your state's official requirements and your approved study materials to make sure you're totally aligned with your local laws. All right, so let's look at the big picture here. An estate in land. This is the big overarching umbrella term that connects everything we're talking about today. Basically, an estate in land is defined as an interest in real property. And hey, when you hear the word estate, try not to picture, a giant mansion with a sweeping driveway. Fun fact, back in medieval England, your estate literally defined your status in society based on the land you controlled. But today, in real estate terms, estate just refers to the degree, the quantity, the nature, and the extent of interest a person actually has in real property. Basically, if you have any recognized legal interest in a property, you've got an estate in land. So that massive umbrella term, it basically splits into two major buckets: the freehold estate on one side and the leasehold estate on the other. Pretty much every type of property interest you're going to study for your exam falls into one of these two categories. We're going to map out the exact boundaries between them right now. Figuring out which bucket a scenario belongs in is so critical, because the rules for a freehold estate are totally different from the rules for a leasehold estate. Let's break down that first category. A freehold estate is fundamentally all about ownership. It is an actual ownership interest. But here's the really critical secondary part. It is for an uncertain duration. So what does that actually mean? Well, it just means there is no fixed, preset end date. You own it until you decide to sell it, or until you pass away, or until some other totally uncertain future event happens. You'll probably see two very common examples of this on your exams: a fee simple estate, which is like the absolute highest form of ownership, and a life estate, which lasts exactly as long as a person's life. Both of those represent real ownership, and neither has a strict end date circled on a calendar. Now let's shift gears over to the second bucket. A leasehold estate is completely associated with renting or leasing. It's a possessory right. So the tenant has the legal right to possess and use the property, but, and this is huge, they do not own the real estate. Not at all. Plus, unlike the freehold side, a leasehold estate is for a limited period. It has a strict timeline. It could be for 1 month, 1 year, or hey, even 99 years, but it's a legally defined, limited duration set out by a lease contract. Let's put these two head to head to really lock this in. Freehold means an ownership interest for an uncertain duration. Leasehold means a possessory right for a limited time under a lease. So the crucial point is this: when you're staring down an exam question, you need to ask yourself two things. Number one, does this person actually own the property, or are they just renting it? And number two, is their time there uncertain, or is there a specific, limited time frame written into a contract? Answering those two questions is going to instantly point you to the correct estate. Let's ground this in reality with a practical example. Picture a homeowner with fee simple ownership. This is your classic American dream scenario. Someone buys a house, their name gets put on the deed, and they hold the absolute highest degree of ownership possible. Because they own it, and because we have absolutely no idea when that ownership will end, whether they sell it in 5 years or keep it in the family for 3 generations, this is a textbook freehold estate. Now contrast that with another real-world scenario: a tenant who is renting an apartment for exactly 1 year. This person totally has the right to possess the apartment. They live there, they have friends over, they've got the keys in their pocket, but they definitely don't own the building. Their entire interest is based strictly on a rental agreement.
And check out the time frame. For 1 year, that's a limited, super specific period. So without a doubt, this represents a leasehold estate.
Okay, I want you to slow down for just a second here. Freehold feels like ownership. Leasehold feels like leasing. I know. It sounds almost too simple, right? But trust me, this is a highly effective memory trick. When you're sitting in that exam room, the pressure is on, the clock is ticking, and all the legal jargon starts to blur together, just fall back on this exact phrase. Freehold, free to own. Leasehold, holding a lease. Keep that memory trick in your back pocket to immediately anchor yourself and correctly categorize whatever scenario the test throws at you. Now, I really need you to pay close attention to this next part. We're going to look at a very common student mistake. I've seen it a million times over the years. Students perfectly memorize the exact definitions we just went through, but they still stumble when they get hit with a tricky scenario question. There's this huge trap that folks fall into with these two estates, and I want to make absolutely sure that you don't fall for it when it actually counts.
Now, what's really interesting about this concept is how we debunk that exact trap. See, the myth is that possession always means ownership. Our human brains just naturally link holding the keys to owning the thing itself. But in real estate law, you have to completely separate those two ideas. The reality is that a tenant does have lawful possession during their lease. They get the right of quiet enjoyment, the right to keep other people out, but they emphatically do not own the property. Possession does not equal ownership. A leasehold estate totally grants possession, but it completely lacks ownership.
All right, let's switch gears from passive listening to some active application with a quick practice question. A tenant rents an apartment under a 1-year lease. What type of estate do they have? Is it A, freehold, B, leasehold, C, fee simple, or D, life estate? Take a quick second, run this scenario through those two filters we set up earlier. Is there actual ownership involved? And is there a limited timeline? Did you get it? The correct answer is, of course, B, leasehold estate. Let's quickly review the why just to make sure you've truly mastered this rule. The tenant has the absolute right to possess or use the property for the lease period, right? But that period is limited to exactly 1 year. And crucially, they don't own the real estate itself. Options A, C, and D all describe ownership interests, which knocks them right out of the running. Leasehold is the only correct bucket for a renting tenant. To wrap up our explainer today, I really want to leave you with this somewhat provocative thought. If you lease the property, who actually holds the freehold estate? Think about it for a second. The tenant holds the leasehold estate, right? But the property itself is still owned by someone. That owner, the landlord, holds the freehold estate, meaning these two completely different estates exist simultaneously on the exact same piece of property. It's such a fascinating dynamic, and it just goes to show how wonderfully layered real estate law can be. Keep pondering how these estates interact with each other, and remember once more to always study your specific state materials, since the exact terminology can vary depending on where you are. Thank you so much for joining me to crack the code on estates and land, and keep up the amazing work with your studies.